chapter 2, we're going to talk about emotion contagion and the various ways that the people around us impact our capacity to thrive, and hopefully a little bit about what we can do about it. So, there's some obvious ones, okay? And while we kind of know about them in our head, we have a little bit of a blind spot about when we're getting sucked into it, okay? We tend to academically be able to sit back and go, yeah, that happens. But when we're in the middle of it, it's really hard to stop the momentum of these things. So, your really classic examples of emotion contagion might be you walk into the tea room at work and everybody is having this big bitch fest about some decision that the boss has just made, and everybody's really frustrated. And there's kind of starts off as just somebody going, oh, did you hear about blah 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 blah, and somebody else goes, yeah, I know, that's like this. And then it kind of just becomes this feeding in spiral of everybody one-upping each other's frustration. And by the end of it, everybody is angry, whether you walked in that way or whether you even particularly care about this particular thing or not. And, the science on how we affect each other and how we reflect other people's emotions around us is really clear. There's no doubt about the fact that when people around us are experiencing either joy or fear or anger, we are viscerally, biologically programmed to shift towards the more common state of emotion in the room, and to hold one type of emotion when everyone else is holding another. Very, very difficult. So, emotion contagion is effectively what happens when the prevailing sentiment in a room or in a space takes over, and everybody else's what they believe to be their own choices and their own emotions they're bringing to the table are usually kind of whitewashed by whatever else is happening in the room. So you've got your pretty classic one, your colleagues being upset. This is where gossip happens. Even people who don't think that they're that into gossip find themselves in the thick of this. This is where, when people are frustrated at work, when your kids, have you seen your kids do this? So, one of them will be upset and then the other one is like upset, even though they can't really articulate why. And you would think that they would grow out of this with time, but no, they just sort of get a little bit subtler. The truth is, we're all programmed to respond to the people around us. I mean, particularly those of us who are high on empathy, which is a vast proportion of us who went into this profession. So you've got your obvious one, but we've also got clients, okay? We've got people who come in wanting us to take on their emotion, okay? So we might have your pet owner who's feeling guilty about the fact that they kind of know they should have bought their vomiting dog in 5 days ago, and now it's going to cost them a lot of money, but they couldn't afford it, or they didn't, or they prioritized something else. And now they want it to be your fault that something is going on. So this isn't pure emotion contagion, but this is a natural human inclination to try to alleviate our own uncomfortable feelings by putting it on someone else. So your classic one in this situation is an owner's feeling guilty. They either can't afford what they know is the right thing to do, or maybe they've done the wrong thing, or, just overlooked something they shouldn't have. And so they have a tendency to subconsciously, they're not being jerks on purpose. This is how we've evolved, to go, if I can make this your fault, then it means it wasn't my fault. So how many times in animal shelters have I been shouted at because somebody's trying to surrender their animal to us, and I've said we've got a 2-week waiting list, or we're closed for surrenders right now. And they pull out all of these guilt trips around how we don't care and we're just in it for the money and we're useless and funded by the government, or they might even go so far as, to make threats to what else they're going to do with that animal. And they put it on us because it's a way of alleviating their own discomfort about the guilt that they're experiencing. And so the way that I tend to think about this is, they've got this kind of nasty big emotion sitting in their head, which, let's say it's guilt, okay? I picture guilt to look a bit like an Obscurus. If you're a Harry Potter fan and you've watched Fantastic Beasts, you've got this kind of awful black ball of shadowy tentacles that come out and kind of reach towards you and try to touch you. And I picture something like that hanging above somebody's head. They're feeling guilty. They've got all this nasty black cloud with tentacles above their head. And what they're trying to do is trying to take it off their head and hand it to you. They're trying to, please, this is yours. This is your guilt, because if it's your fault, it's not my fault. And they don't even know they're doing it most of the time. It's subconscious. And what happens to us, whether we're in an animal shelter, unable to accept a surrender or unable to, take a case as seriously as that person thinks we should, or whether we are in a vet clinic and we can't do the cesarean on their French bulldog for free, or we can't reduce the cost of some of the medications that we know is expensive, but we made the decisions we made about our own animals knowing that. And these people are trying to make it our fault that they can't do what they know needs doing. So we have choices here, which is effectively to go, I see that emotion and I'm going to leave it on the table. So let them take off their ugly little obscurus hat, let them put it on the table and shove it in your direction. And you can be as polite as you want around, letting them unload that, and then let them finish and turn around and walk out the door, leaving it on the table behind you. And then if you're lucky, you've got some wonderful support staff who might come in and sweep up the table and chuck that in the bin without even knowing it was there. All right. So emotion contagion comes in a few different forms, and we've got this kind of passive absorption of the things of people around us just because we're empathetically inclined to be susceptible to the prevailing mood in the room. But also, we've got this biological need to alleviate uncomfortable feelings. And the most effective way to do that is to subconsciously try to make things another person's fault. And that is why we end up with so many, oh, well, you're a vet driving around in your BMW, you're only in this for the money. And we all know what a joke that is. But they're saying it probably not because they're a horrible person, but because they don't know what to do with their own discomfort. And lastly, the one I want to touch on around emotion contagion is a bit of a, I guess, maybe controversial thing that goes on in our profession, particularly true in the veterinary profession, where the narrative online, the narrative at conferences, is about how awful our profession is, how it will break you. We have this, we're almost given a warning right at the beginning of vet school for most of us. And if you're a nurse or a tech, or, you're often in your first week in a new job told, that this profession will break you or maybe even kill you. And we have done that for good reason. We believed that we were setting people up with realistic expectations, but what we also did was set them up with this narrative that is a confirmation bias. Because once we are aware of that story and that narrative, we're highly susceptible to seeing that narrative around the place. We know what confirmation bias is. You buy a red Toyota and suddenly there's 16 million red Toyotas on the road. There's no more red Toyotas. You just hyper aware of that thing now that it's relevant to you. And the trouble with this is that because people who are having a positive experience of the veterinary profession very rarely are online talking about it, or it doesn't get the keynotes at conferences. We just constantly are bombarded with confirmation bias really easily, and anything that challenges that confirmation bias becomes almost abnormal and overlookable. So our profession is accidentally doing emotion contagion to us on a global community level when all we see in our Facebook groups, at our conferences, on LinkedIn, on any sort of community, the voices that tend to be talking and the emotion that becomes the prevailing one in the space tend to be ones of disillusionment, frustration, or not enough. And this is dangerous for us. So, what are we going to do? Okay, how do we vaccinate ourselves against this contagion? There's quite a few different ways, and this is sort of just the tools that are the most easy to pull out when you're stuck in this space. So, firstly, just limit your exposure. Stop joining the Facebook groups that this is all that goes around and all of the disillusionment. Stay out of the staff room if people, all of they're doing is gossiping. Just don't involve yourself in those conflicts, all right? A really, really valuable one is learning to notice this stuff. And, a little bit like we talked earlier about being able to articulate what's actually going on in your head makes so much difference to noticing and being able to adjust. This is true really strongly here. So, being able to notice and hopefully say out loud, because you give the other people a bit of a crutch if they're trying to find a way out of this emotion, saying, "Oh, this feels like a bit gossipy, guys. I'm out." Or just noticing when you're in a LinkedIn space and all you've read about is all of the doomsday stuff about the veterinary practice today, notice, is that the only narrative? And go and protect yourself by looking up a good news story. One of my favorite things to follow is a lot of fix the news kind of programs whereby they acknowledge there's so much bad news going on in the world right now. But what they want to send is a daily news article about all of the great things that have happened in the last day or the last week, and all of the scientific advances and all of the advances in human rights and all of the climate change wins that we've had. And they're just these constant. And when you read one of these newsletters, there's dozens and dozens of things in a week that you can be so excited about. They're not what we're talking about. So being able to name, I'm feeling overwhelmed by all of this doomsday online, or I'm feeling my emotions changed in this environment in the staff room, or this client is trying to pass me something that they've got going on. Being able to just notice it and stop and take a deep breath is only half the step, but it's a great first step. And if you can, now we're going to try to actually reverse that and go and seek something else. Okay. The alternative to naming it, to taming it, the emotion contagion. I like the old visualization. All right. My obscurest guilt. Another way of naming things that are going on is, calling your anxiety Karen, having a name for the negative thoughts in your head that are going on. And we're going to talk a little bit about unhelpful thoughts later, but it's a really good vaccination tool is to just hear those thoughts and give them specific voice, give them a specific name, so that when you've got that negative self-talk going on in your ear, you can turn around and go, "Oh, Karen's at it again," or "Oh, go away, Peter." And the way that that is helpful, even though it sounds a little bit far out, is because it puts into perspective that that's a voice in your head, but it's only one voice. It's a perspective. And if you think about it, you got your devil and your angel on one shoulder each. They are just voices that you can listen to or not listen to, or take or leave or merge, but you are still who is in control of your choices now. So by turning it into this finite, observable, nameable thing, it loses so much of its power because it's not you, it's our voice, it's our thought. One of my other favorite vaccination tools when we're feeling a little bit doomsday, or when we're sort of sucked into the big emotions in the room, is some people would call it perspective, which is sort of helpful, but I find it a little bit invalidating. So, like being told, "Oh, don't be upset about that. Everybody has it worse than you." I don't think that that's a very helpful way to look at life. But I really like an example of anxiety, particularly when you're feeling overwhelmed by things, is recognizing that your body does not have the physiological capacity to differentiate between a threat to your life and a minor threat to your reputation. Okay. When we were evolving in caveman times, that was just not a skill that our body needed to create. And so we have one physiological set of responses to stress and fear and worry and anxiety. And that is to assume that something is going to kill you. It is the response that your body was built to have when there was a saber-toothed tiger coming into your cave, right? And we haven't evolved since then. Our world has, but we're still the same functional beings. So when your boss says, "Can I see you in my office in 5 minutes?" your body says, "Saber-toothed tiger, oh my God." When your client writes a negative review on Facebook, your body says, "I'm going to die." We can't differentiate it between it physiologically. So the only thing we can do is name it to tame it. We can stop and we can go, "My body is reacting to this situation because it has no other way to do. So some of that, the heart beating in my chest, the blood rushing to my ears, the like palpitations, the pit in my stomach, it's actually not appropriate for the threats that we now face. Because if nobody is going to die, your body is overreacting. And again, that doesn't change the fact that your body's going to have that response. All it does is helps us name what's going on and put it into a bucket of that's a thing that's happening for me right now. Same as Karen's voice in my ear or the obscurus on the table. They are all real things. It doesn't detract from the validity of them. It just enables them to acknowledge that that's a thing and I am still me and I still get to make my choices outside of those things going on because it's just a thing. So I always encourage people to ask before they're having a big meltdown, when they're feeling really overwhelmed. Call me hyperventilating. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, I've just screwed up this thing really big. I've just made a massive error in my case. Don't get me wrong. Please, making an error on a case is devastating. Losing an animal you thought you could save is devastating, and that is okay, and you are allowed to sit with it. All I am challenging you is to remember that there is not a saber-toothed tiger, and no matter what's gone wrong, if everyone is well, it's okay, and your body is overreacting.